doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Good, good. Can you tell us your name?
My name is Sharon Washington Barnes, and I am a manager of an after school program in Oakland, California. And I also am the founder and president of Black Lives Matter MANTECA and the founder and executive director of Change for Sean.
Um, so can you tell us why you're here today?
Yes, so I'm here basically just to talk about my brother, who he was as a person, and his story, what happened to him, and the fight that we are continuing on to make change in his name and ensure that no other family has to suffer like we've suffered at the hands of systemic racism and medical negligence.
Um, your brother. Can you tell us more about him?
Yes. So my brother is actually right here. That's him and that's me when we were kids. So my brother's name is Sean Edward Washington II. He's named after our father. He's the oldest of three, so it was Sean, Sherelle, and then me, Sharon. And he was literally just the best big brother that you could ask for, really. He knew everything. He laid the blueprint for me. Everything that I've done in my life is because he showed me, and he did it first. I played sports all through college because he showed me how and made that, something that I wanted to do. I looked up to him, the smartest person I know. Everybody in my family, and we're not being biased when we say this, but he was literally a genius. He knew how to do everything from Rubik's Cubes to teaching himself how to play 8 different instruments without even knowing how to read music. So he was just a unique person. He was a camp counselor for I think 7 years of his life, where he got to touch and change the lives of many youth within the Bay Area and really all over the world. He was also an artist, so he was a photographer, a videographer. He knew how to draw, he knew how to paint, and he also knew how to make music. And so he was just an amazing person, very kind, always wanting to help others. Never really had nothing negative to say. You could like ask him any question in the world, and he would have the answer for it. He literally was like why I am who I am. I owe it all to my brother. He inspired me to play sports with the boys and be better than them. He inspired me to read as much as I could and gain all this knowledge because for somehow he knew it. I never saw him reading a book. I never saw him googling things. It was just like I could ask him something and he knew it. He was a soon to be father. His daughter is now 1.5 years old and never got the chance to be embraced by her father. And so my family is just working hard to make sure we keep his legacy and his memory alive for her. And so, just all in all, to say, like, my brother was an amazing man whose life was cut way too short at the age of 29.
Um, could you tell us about how uh, he passed?
Yes. So my brother passed away last April, April 2019, at Kaiser Hospital in Manteca, California. So Sean had been sick for a couple weeks, and he checked into Kaiser on April 2nd, complaining of coughing and having a fever. And nobody ran any blood work or anything. They prescribed him some medication and sent him on his way. He then visited a urgent care on April 21st, complaining of coughing, having a fever, and chills. No blood work, no tests being run again. Gave him some more antibiotics and cough medicine and sent him home. On April 24th, Sean was seen by a dentist and a dental surgeon who, by the time he reached them, he had some sores in his mouth, fever, still coughing, and the chills. They again gave him some medicine, and told him to follow up with his primary care physician. The very next night, April 25th, around midnight, Shawn began coughing up blood, and his girlfriend, pregnant girlfriend, Shania, came over to take him to the hospital. And at that time, by the time she arrived, she was so scared that he had coughed up so much blood, they called an ambulance. Shawn arrived to KAISER MANTECA on April 26 around 1:15 in the morning, complaining of coughing up blood and having trouble breathing, as well as the symptoms that he had presented with in the previous weeks. And Shawn was allowed to sit in the emergency room with a 0.01 white blood cell count for 8 hours while his lungs actively filled with blood, while doctors badgered him, me, and his girlfriend about his insurance status, badgered him about being on drugs and having AIDS. So he was left in an emergency room for over 8 hours while his lungs actively filled with blood. When Shawn checked in around 1:15, they ran tests, and around 2 o'clock found out that he was septic and that he had a 0.01 white blood cell count. Yet, he was never moved to an ICU. He was never treated at the level of care that somebody who is septic is supposed to be treated as. KAISER didn't follow their own sepsis protocol. They didn't heavily monitor him. They didn't make us wear gloves. They didn't make us wear masks. And like I said, never even moved him to the intensive care unit. They literally let him sit there for 8 hours while they asked if I would go home to get his insurance card. And they told us that he couldn't be transferred to the Modesto KAISER, where they had specialists on hand, because they weren't able to reach his insurance. Yet, we found out in reviewing his records after the case that when Shawn visited that same KAISER on April 2nd, he presented them with his insurance cards. So had they took the time to look at his files, they would have known they already had his insurance on file, which we believe played a huge a reason into why they didn't treat him like they should have that day. They were more concerned with his insurance status, and to us, we believe also the color of his skin. Here's a black male presenting with AIDS-like symptoms and a pregnant girlfriend who's left his wallet at home, who you all, prejudged and assumed that his life wasn't useful, it wasn't worth saving, and allowed him, like I said, to sit in an emergency room for 8 hours while his lungs filled with blood. And we had a pathologist do his autopsy, a private autopsy, because the hospital never even told us that it was possible to get an autopsy through the coroner. The pathologist report let us know that his lungs were completely full with blood, both of them, and that she had never seen anyone's lungs that full. Shawn actually complained and asked to be intubated within those 8 hours of him being at the hospital twice, and he was denied both times. And then it took another hour before the doctors realized he was so severe and could not breathe, and his oxygen levels were so low they finally decided to intubate him around 7 in the morning. And by that time, his lungs had already been filled with blood, so there was nowhere for the air to go. I was actually called back into the room while they were still doing CPR on him, and they let me know that when they went to intubate him, his heart caught a rhythm and that they were doing CPR. I rushed into the room, his pregnant girlfriend rushed into the room, and my elderly grandfather and my uncle rushed into the room, and we literally watched them pound on his chest until they called the time. And the way that it worked out, I have to say that it was nothing but God, because my mom, all of her 5 sisters, and my grandmother were all out of town, and I had to call on FaceTime and tell my mother, not my mother, I had to tell my grandmother and my 5 aunts that my brother was gone. By that time, my mom had been on a red-eye plane to come back from San Diego, and by the time she landed, my brother passed at 8:21 a.m. My mom's flight landed at 8 a.m. And so it was almost as if he knew she was going to be there soon, and he was tired, and he literally passed 20 minutes after her flight landed, and her flight was stuck on the tarmac for 20 minutes after it landed. So I truly believe my mom wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to see her only son go, or she wouldn't be here today to be the grandmother and mother that she still is to my sister and I. And so I had to wait until my mother arrived at the hospital to tell her myself that her only son was gone. And then I had to call my father, who lives in another state, and let him know that his only son is gone. And then I had to call my brother's best friends and let them know that their best friend was gone. No doctor stayed around to tell my mother. When the doctor finally came, he didn't know what to say because he was a brand new doctor. He hadn't been around until after they called the time of death on my brother. He told us that all he could speculate was that Shawn had pneumonia. And after getting the pathology report and after having multiple doctors look at his case, we came to find out that he didn't even have pneumonia. What they saw as pneumonia when they finally did an x-ray was actually the blood filling in his lungs. And they never bothered to treat the blood. They let him cough up 8 vomit bags of blood and complain that he couldn't breathe and asked twice to be intubated. And if you know my brother, he's scared of needles. He's scared of the hospital, but he asked twice for that treatment because he was that scared and he couldn't breathe that badly, and he didn't receive the care on time. He was allowed to sit there and let his life literally dwindle away and never get to meet his daughter. And we are now currently trying our best to change laws. We're fighting to change protocols within hospitals. So, like I mentioned, my brother and I, his youngest sister and girlfriend, were there for the majority of the time with him in the hospital. I was asked multiple times to go home and get his insurance card. That's something that we want to fight to change. No family with their family member laying in a hospital room coughing up blood with a 0.01 white blood cell count should have to ever worry about insurance to make sure that their family member is taken care of. My brother the nurses literally told us that he could not be transferred to a better hospital because they couldn't get in contact with his insurance company. So insurance and money got in the way of my brother receiving proper care so that he could maybe still be here today. That's something that we're currently fighting against, as well as them not following their sepsis protocol. Kaiser is supposed to be in doing this research after my brother's death. Kaiser named themselves one of the best hospitals in sepsis care, and they outlined this protocol that calls for them to heavily monitor a sepsis patient and to consistently give them IV and antibiotics to fight the infection. Yet Shawn was given IV, but he was never given the antibiotics until 5 hours after him sitting in that emergency room when it was too late. Shawn came in trouble breathing, but was never intubated until 7 hours into him sitting in that emergency room. Nobody followed their protocols. Why? Because it was a black male that they did not value his life. And history and research shows that our lives within the medical system are not as valued. We receive less care. We aren't believed when we come in, complaining of certain pains and issues. We're written off. And that is exactly what happened to my brother that day. And just to even give more information, Shawn had a black female as his head nurse. And she made a comment to us saying that she wasn't going to leave his side because she didn't like the way he was being treated. To this day, I don't know what that means. I don't know what they were keeping from us, what they weren't doing, what they were discussing about him that made her make that statement about her own team in reference to my brother's care. And it leaves me angry and my family so upset to know that this was preventable. My brother's life could have been saved that day, yet it wasn't. So we're actually still in the legal process, and so there's a law, and it's called MICRA. It stands for Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act, and it was enacted in 1975 by medical companies. So companies like KAISER and big hospitals, they paid politicians to lobby on this law and get it passed. And basically what this law does is it takes all of the liability and responsibility off of these hospitals and facilities and places it on the grieving family. And what I mean by that is the grieving family has to hire doctors. Well, when you're filing a medical negligence complaint, the grieving family, as in my family, is responsible for hiring medical professionals that are going to come and speak on our behalf. We're also carry the burden of having to find a lawyer within a year's time. So this law puts a 1-year statute on medical injury, medical negligence cases. And so what that means is from the year of the day the person died, you have a year to find a lawyer that's going to take your case. So not only are you supposed to grieve, not only are you supposed to plan a funeral, you're supposed to find a lawyer within this time frame, within a year, that is willing to take on your case. And this micro law, not only does it give you that year statute, it also placed a cap on the compensation that families can receive. And it's something like $250,000 is what families can receive for medical injury and medical negligence compensation. And after you hire those medical professionals, after you pay lawyer fees, and that's if you find a lawyer, because just alone in hiring those medical professionals to speak on your behalf, that pretty much drains all of that $250,000 that you would have received if you even won. And so what we found is, in trying to find a lawyer to fight for us against this medical negligence that we believe each facility displayed, the KAISER MANTECA, the Urgent Care MANTECA, and the Valley Oak Dental in MANTECA, and all of the people that were on Sean's team at each of those facilities, we believe that they were all negligent. And so when we were trying to find a lawyer to take on this case, we found that a lot of lawyers are afraid in a sense, or don't want to take on this case because they're not sure they're going to get compensated fairly after you've spent all this money on those medical professionals that you need to come and say like, hey, yes, they did mess up. And so it's like a catch-22. We're a below middle class family. We work hard for everything that we have, and there's a lot of families that don't have the money to pay for lawyer fees and get these medical professionals up front. And so basically this law keeps people of color and working class people out of the courts, because we don't have the money to pay for a lawyer by ourselves. We don't have the money to pay for these medical professionals by ourselves. We're counting on that $250,000 that we may or may not win to seek justice. And money should never be the reason why families aren't able to seek justice, as well as that year statute. And so not only are we fighting to make these facilities be held accountable for the loss of my brother, of Sean, we're also fighting to change this micro law that has been in place since 1975 that doesn't even keep up with the cost of living in 2020. And we believe also is another way of keeping certain people out of the courts. And this all works on in favor of these medical facilities because it lowers their insurance costs. So it lowers their insurance costs and makes it harder for grieving families to seek the justice that they know they deserve, due to this outdated law that we are also fighting to change. And so I'm not able to say the specific names of the nurses and the doctors, although we have them. I'm only able to name the facilities because we have been fortunate enough to find a lawyer that was able to file the paperwork for us within that year statute. So we do have we are able to serve these facilities. We are able to continue this fight because we have been fortunate enough to find people that have heard Sean's story and recognize how tragic and unnecessary it was, and are willing to go out on a limb and fight for us. And so we're currently waiting for paperwork to be signed off by a judge so that we can serve each facility and move on with this process, as well as talking with some big name lawyers and politicians to get this this law changed, this Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act of 1975. We're working to get that changed as well, because we believe that is one of the main reasons why families aren't able to speak up and fight back. Kaiser has a long history of being Killer Kaiser, as a lot of people call them, and medical facilities have a long-standing history of not treating Black people at the same rate that they do their white counterparts. And so not only are we working to change those laws, we're working to change the way that the medical field deals with our Black and brown people as well. Yeah, it's hard. Like I mentioned, I'm the youngest of three, and so that's my big brother, my hero, you know what I mean? And so death had never hit that close to me before, and so to actually like see it, a lot of my family is dealing with a lot of trauma. I have a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares, a lot of symptoms of PTSD because of what I had to witness, and let alone the fact that it's been almost 2 years now and there's still been no justice. There's been no acknowledgement of the negligence that took place by any of the facilities. And my brother has a 1-year-old daughter. Her name is SHAWN'S. That her mother now has to, carry that burden of raising her without her father. And, my family is there to help as much as we can, but we can never replace the love that my brother would have given his daughter. She was the first grandchild on both sides, and the first great-grand on my family side. And so it was a huge, huge milestone that we were ready to celebrate. And now it's kind of like a dark cloud around those times because my brother, her father, Shawn, is not here to be the father that he was ready to be and prepared and so excited to be. And so to carry the burden of not only watching your brother pass away, then having to tell your mother and her fate, like that to me, I think is one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with around my brother's situation is I felt like I brought that pain upon my mother because I had to be the one to tell her and hear her scream. And there's no sound like a mother, wailing for their child and having to walk her in to see his body. And there being no professional there to handle their job and that burden being placed upon me, the youngest sibling. It was hard. And then now to, watch my niece grow up without her father, and she looks just like him. She acts just like him. It's hard. And also, with all of that trauma and all of that pain that I have to carry around, I have to still speak his name. I'm an activist, and I have traveled so many places speaking my brother's name, telling his story, and each time it's like reliving the pain all over again because at the end of the story, I still have to speak about how there's no justice for Shawn. There's no acknowledgement of how great he was by these places that took his body, that took his leaving his breath away from him. And I had to, keep that strong face and keep going and keep having these phone calls and even like being here today and telling his story it's hard because my mom, it's too hard for her to do it. My sister is just not in her personality to be in front of a camera, and this is just what I do. And so people expect me to, just do it. And it's hard. It's very hard speaking on somebody that you were never prepared to lose and not prepared to watch go, and then not prepared to kind of pick up the pieces after they've been gone. And so that's the biggest thing that I want people to know, honestly, is that when you lose somebody, especially when you lose somebody at the hands of racism and medical negligence and systemic racism within our healthcare, within our policing, within almost every system in America, not only does it affect the life that was lost, but it constantly affects those that are still alive to speak their name every day. And we forget about that. We go out and we protest and say their lives matter, but the phone calls stop after a certain amount of time. People don't, come and check on you and make sure you're okay. These news sources and these people who want to get on the story while it's hot, they don't call no more. And then you have a system that is so broken when it comes to us that you can't even get the justice you deserve. Because no amount of compensation will ever fill our hearts like having my brother here would. There's no amount of compensation, there's no amount of I'm sorry's that is ever going to make up for the way that my mother has to feel. And so it's not about the money, and it's not about any type of fame or anything around that. It's truly about creating change for Shawn, which is our nonprofit that we've started in my brother's name and in his legacy. Creating change for Shawn literally means making sure that no other family has to suffer at the hands of medical negligence, systemic racism, and any other form of racism in this country. It means creating change for Shawn so that no other family has to worry about this biased and racist law that is holding certain people from gaining access to the courts. Change for Shawn means no other father has to lose their life and have their child grow up without them. No other mother has to watch her significant other being buried. Change for Shawn means no other family, no other mother has to lose her only son for no reason, simply because people didn't value his life, simply because people cared more about money than about saving him. Creating change for Shawn, and that is our goal, is just to make sure nobody has to feel what we feel, because it's hard and it's not fair, and it's definitely a burden that nobody should have to worry about carrying.
You're very strong and
Thank you.
courageous. Uh, and I know this was a very tragic uh, incident that happened. Uh, but if there was anybody else that could, you know, make a change in
Yeah.
this, I think it would be you would be the perfect one to, to take the lead
Yeah.
in this fight.
Thank you. Now, I appreciate that. Literally, like, I it sucks because so much pain and loss came out of it, but God knew what he was doing. And I say that because I was already an activist. I was already in this work with social justice, but my eyes weren't open to what was going on in the medical field and that aspect of being Black in America. I was dealing with the police and dealing with our terrible education system. And my eyes, even as a Black woman, knowing, you know what I mean, that Black women are dying at alarming rates or in childbirth in America. Even knowing those things, my eyes just weren't as open to what goes on in the medical field when it comes to Black people. And so if it had not been for my brother, if it had not been for the significance of his loss and for God already placing me on a journey of social justice, I don't know that the change that we've been able to make already would have happened. I don't know, and I've always say this, that, there must always be sacrifice. And my brother made that sacrifice so that I could have the platform to speak the way I needed to speak, so that I could have the platform for people to hear what needed to be heard, and so that I could have the platform to create change so that his name does not go in vain, and so that other families can say, man, if it wasn't for Shawn, my son wouldn't still be here. If it wasn't for Shawn and his family and how they created change, this bias law would still be in place and I wouldn't be able to file this lawsuit. If it hadn't been for Shawn, reform within our medical system would have never happened. If it hadn't been for Shawn, this new law that puts all these checks and balances in place never would have happened. And so when I tell my brother's story 5 years from now, I don't want it to be a story of still sadness and pain. I want it to be a story of redemption. We changed for Shawn. We changed the system. We changed the law. We changed lives for Shawn. And I want it to be a story of redemption to where I can feel proud and so that other people can know that the storm is going to come, that it's going to be hard sometimes, and that life ain't perfect. You might lose a loved one. You might lose a best friend. You might, have to suffer at the hands of racism or whatever life throws your way. There's going to be battles. But that they can look at what we've done with Shawn's legacy and know, like, trouble don't last always, and that, things get better, and that we can use our pain and we can use our stories to change somebody else's life, to encourage and uplift somebody else so that they know that their storm doesn't last always. And so that's pretty much just the goal. I want to make sure that my brother's sacrifice stands as a true sacrifice, that it wasn't for nothing, and that it was so that his daughter can continue to prosper with the family that he has built to be around her. And so if nobody takes anything else from my brother's situation in his life, which he lived to the fullest, like to the fullest. He did everything he wanted to do and more. Did things he, didn't want to do, but did it because he knew, it might could help somebody else. And I just want people to know that, his life mattered, it matters, and that it will always matter.
Thank you.
No, thank y'all.